Hi everyone, Aaron here for Zollotech, and the iPhone 13 Pro Max has been out for over a year at this point. I used it as my main and only phone for an entire year, and then once the 14 Pro Max came out, I actually switched to that, which I have right here. And the first thing I noticed right away when turning on the 13 Pro Max, going back to it, is that it actually feels much lighter. You'll see that with the smaller camera lens, I'm not sure if you can tell here, but that smaller camera lens definitely makes it a little more top-heavy on the 14 Pro Max compared to the 13 Pro Max. It's not a huge difference, but it's definitely something I noticed right away when picking it up for the first time in a little while. And many people have asked me to go over the phone after having it for a year, talk about durability, scratches, battery life, battery health, as well as if you should still buy it, as it's a little bit tricky to get the 14 Pro Max right now since there's supply chain constraints and more. Now, other than the lighter weight, let's first talk about durability. And durability is pretty good on this phone. Now, I didn't use a case or screen protector for the entire year, and of course, I could have prevented scratches and different bumps and things over that year by using one of those. However, I typically just use Apple Care for that, and I've never actually cracked a screen yet. So hopefully, I don't have that in the future, but if I do, I have Apple Care. But I wanted to show you different scratches and durability. So as we zoom in here, now up close on the right-hand side, you can see there's a bunch of scratches. If I turn off the display, you can see that a little bit more clearly. This was actually from setting it down on a table by mistake that actually had nails on it. As I film outside a lot, that's what caused this. So there's that as well as a small scratch right there. But other than that, the overall display is held up pretty well, except for, again, down here, mostly from nails and the other side here as well. Now I can have this replaced pretty inexpensively at an Apple store, and I probably will under Apple Care, just have the display replaced to fix those issues. Again, I could have prevented it with something like a screen protector or just maybe even having a case on it. Now the same is true for the overall stainless steel. It's held up pretty well, and as I tilt this here into the light, you can see there's a ton of different scratches. Now I actually can't see these with my eyes except through the camera lens here. So because we're so close up, you can actually see those scratches here, but I can't see these just looking at the bottom of the phone regularly. So it will get some scratches. It's stainless steel and can be polished, and you could get rid of those pretty easily. But if we go around the outside edge, it's actually held up pretty well, and you'll see as we turn this corner, there's a few scratches there, but nothing really that you see regularly looking at it every single day. The same is true for the back glass. Now, these I don't think have any scratches on them as far as the cameras. They're made out of sapphire, and even though it may not be the highest quality sapphire, it actually has zero scratches from just setting it down every single day. So as you'll see as I tilt this here, I don't see any scratches whatsoever on the lenses at all. So those have held up well. I typically recommend people against putting covers over these, as you can change the overall quality of the photos. And based off of that, I think this has held up really well after a year of use without anything on it, just putting it in my pocket every day, setting it down on a table like this. I never set it on metal or concrete except by mistake with those scratches. Now, as far as the battery health after a year, I had a separate video about this, but using it every single day throughout the year, maybe I used the iPhone 13 Pro and the iPhone 13 mini for a week total each, so maybe I didn't use it for 2 weeks, so 50 weeks. And then if we go to battery health and charging, you'll see I'm still at 98%. Now, this is after 227 cycles, according to Coconut Battery. So that means the battery has been charged and fully discharged 227 times in a year for me. If you have more than that, of course, the battery health is going to go lower. If you have less, it should be about the same or higher. So I think that's pretty good after a year. You could be at 90% if you use this as your main device all the time. You're never using a computer or an iPad. Well, then you're going to have a lower battery health. And you can get that replaced if you need to, the battery itself from Apple, for about $70 if you had to. But typically 2 years, I would expect 80% or more. That's what Apple says. If it's less than that, then get your battery replaced. As far as the overall battery life on this is still better than my 14 Pro Max in my experience. Now, maybe that has to do with the always-on display, and if I have the always-on display off, I'll probably see about the same battery life. But typically, the battery life on the 13 Pro Max seems to be just a little bit better, and most people that send me their battery life have shown the same thing. And thanks to someone that sent me their battery life that I have in my Telegram channel, you'll see here that their battery life is about 8 hours and 15 minutes on a 13 Pro Max with 1 hour and 30 minutes of screen off time. I had them tap on the last day as well, and they had 7 hours and 40 minutes, and they were using about 85% of their battery life. So that's pretty good. 10 hours throughout the day, and they're actually on a beta. So they're on iOS 16.2 beta 3, and that's pretty good since betas sometimes get worse battery life. But in general, I would say that's pretty great after a year, depending on what you're doing. Overall, it's going to get you through a day without a problem. I find that with the 13 Pro Max, I would have 50 to 60% of my battery life left after the day. With the 14 Pro Max, it can go between 40 and 50%. So there's definitely an advantage with the 13 Pro Max, probably due again to that always-on display. Now, speed and performance is pretty much the same this year. We have the A15 Bionic, 6GB of RAM, and you'll see scrolling with ProMotion is nice and smooth. If we go over to the app library and scroll, it's nice and smooth. Now, many people have said that the 14 Pro Max is a little bit smoother. Now, it does have a dedicated chip for that smoothness, but for the most part, I don't think you're going to notice the difference unless you're really into displays. So in general, it feels very much the same whether you're opening music. You'll see the load similarly. They're just in the Listen Now screen here, and they loaded about the same. The 13 Pro is a little bit slower. We'll go into podcasts. That was already open. If we go back, you'll see if we go into fitness maybe here. Again, they're loading at about the exact same rate. So I really wouldn't expect you to think that the 14 Pro Max is that much faster unless you're doing maybe photographic sort of manipulation a lot, where you're changing a lot of different things about a photo, editing it an awful lot. You might notice a speed difference there, but most people won't notice it at all, despite Geekbench scores being a little bit different. However, the overall use is going to be very, very similar. The display is definitely not as good as the new one, is in the sense of it being as bright outside. It goes up to well over 1,000 nits of brightness. The 14 Pro Max goes to 2,000 nits outside, but most of the time you're not going to notice the difference unless you're actually maybe in a super bright environment. You really won't notice. Inside, it'll be about the same. Outside, it makes a difference. So no complaints here. It's a great display, has great viewing angles, always has, and will until something incredible comes out in the future. As far as the overall heat of the phone, many people have said that, yes, it gets a little bit warmer maybe than the 14 Pro Max. It's a larger nanometer size, so that makes sense. I can feel a little bit of warmth, but nothing too extreme. I really wouldn't worry about that too much, and Apple regulates that through the chipset and makes sure it's nice and cool. I charge this using a wireless charger every night and really have no issues. And you saw my battery health earlier. So no issues unless you're playing games, it will heat up, or maybe you're fast charging it, it will get a little warm. But again, it's regulated by iOS. And as far as iOS updates, well, this will get updates for many, many years. And you should expect it probably until iOS 22, maybe 21. We don't really know, as Apple doesn't say how long they're going to support it. But even after it stops getting regular feature updates, you'll typically get security updates for years after that. So if you're worrying about, well, I won't have the latest updates for years to come, you'll probably switch phones by the time it's time to get the new features, so I really wouldn't worry about that too much. Now, the cameras really make a difference with the 13 Pro Max even compared to the 14 Pro Max. The first thing is the front-facing camera on the 14 Pro Max is definitely an improvement as it now has autofocus. The overall quality seems to be a little bit better as well. However, the quality of the rear cameras, despite the new one having a better camera in theory with 48 megapixels, seems to have some issues when it comes to different photo processing. So you can see here, here's a photo I took of my Mac Pro, and on the left is the 13 Pro Max, and on the right is the 14 Pro Max. And you can see there's a very different color sort of saturation or just look to the overall pictures between both of them. For some reason, the 14 Pro Max is processing them differently. It's sort of darkening them, and they just don't look as good in my opinion. The same is true with HDR video. Using the 14 Pro Max with HDR, I actually prefer the look of the 13 Pro Max with HDR. So if you record a lot of HDR video, you're going to notice a difference. Also, some of the footage looks much more sharp or over sharpened on the 14 Pro Max. So there's that difference there, and that's definitely a reason not to get the new one if you were thinking about it and you record a ton of video. I actually prefer most of the video out of the 13 Pro Max, unless you're using that front-facing camera. The front-facing camera is definitely worth the upgrade if that's what you use all the time. However, if you're still wondering if you should buy a 13 Pro Max or a 14 Pro Max, well, if you were considering the 14 Plus, pick up the 13 Pro Max, as this is a better phone. It has the ProMotion display, and the 14 Plus has the same processor even, with a small bump in one of the cores. Otherwise, this is the better phone with the better cameras, but if you're looking at the 14 Pro Max, if you can get a good deal on one, then sure, definitely upgrade, or you have to have that dynamic island you could upgrade. But otherwise, I probably wouldn't do that. I had someone tell me yesterday that they actually added a line to their Verizon plan and they were able to get a 13 Pro for free. Now, that doesn't mean that they won't pay for that throughout the plan, but they said their plan was $30 to add that line, and it included the phone. So they have to keep that for a couple years, but it was included in the price, and it wouldn't have been any cheaper if they didn't get the phone. So that seemed like a pretty good deal, and if you can find those deals, that's probably what I would go for still, since that seems to be the best way to get one right now. So free versus maybe paying over $1,000, well, then go for the 13 Pro Max. It'll last a few years. Then when you want to upgrade, go for maybe the 14 Pro Max or 15 Pro Max at that point, or 15 Ultra, or whatever they decide to call it. So after a few years, I think this will still be a great phone. It's been a great phone over the past year, and whether you go with the Pro Max or the Pro, I think you'd be happy either way. It will have all of the features except the dynamic island features. Otherwise, that and the always-on display, that's pretty much it. Everything else on this is definitely great. So let me know if you have a 13 Pro Max, if you've been considering getting a 14 Pro Max or something else. I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. If you'd like to get your hands on this wallpaper, of course, it'll be linked in the description as it always is. And if you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe. And if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. As always, thanks for watching. This is Aaron. I'll see you next time.